Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence with psychiatrist Bernard David Beitman, MD. Dr. Beitman is the founder of the Coincidence Project. The project encourages people like you to tell each other coincidence stories. To learn more about Dr. Beitman's work, put Connecting with Coincidence in your web browser. You'll find his book, his Psychology Today blog, and the interviews from this podcast. And now your host, Bernard Beitman, MD.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD, a psychiatrist, and I love studying the mind and the brain and how they connect with each other. And we're going to have the opportunity to do that more than I usually do because we're having a neuroscientist talk with us today. If you want to order my new book, the links are, for those of you on YouTube, are below. It's called Meaningful Coincidences, How Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. And it just so happens, by some quirk of fate, shall we call it a coincidence? Well, it is, but we know how it happens, so it's not really. But our guest today, book came out the same day mine came out from the same publishing company. And we also have the same publicist. So it's like, this is the first time we've met, but we kind of know each other from those ways. Well, for today, I'm going to propose the existence of our mental atmosphere, which I've written about in the book, the psychosphere. The psychosphere surrounds us like our air atmosphere, in which all beings are immersed. Within the flux of the psychosphere, varieties of energy and information move the way gases, clouds, winds, water vapors, particles, and electromagnetic radiation move in our air atmosphere. The energy information of the psychosphere includes the full spectrum of human ideas and feelings and behaviors. Just as our living bodies breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, each human mind interchanges ideas and feelings and behavior patterns with the psychosphere by expressing them and drawing them in. I suggest that the psychosphere is our most accessible realm to higher consciousness. Now, is that true or not? We're going to be able to maybe talk about that a little bit today, how that might be. Our guest today is Mona Sobhani, PhD. She's a cognitive neuroscientist, author, and entrepreneur. A former research scientist at the University of Southern California, she holds a doctorate in neuroscience from the University of Southern California, completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Vanderbilt with a MacArthur Foundation Law and Neuroscience project. She is now, in her entrepreneurial role, co-founder and head of research at Pala, a platform that delivers trusted wisdom. Trusted wisdom. Oh boy, you got to look at that word, trusted wisdom. How do you know about trusted wisdom? What do you look surprised for? Can't hear me? Can't talk?
Sorry, I lost you for a second. My headphones switched.
Sorry about that. Okay, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Well, that happens. Trusted wisdom in short, engaging, and relatable videos, using scientifically proven methods that accelerate personal and professional growth. It's nice to use science practically, and that's what she's talking about doing, and that's what I like to do as a therapist. She's the author of Proof of Spiritual Phenomena, a neuroscientist's discovery of the ineffable mysteries of the universe. Ineffable is a funny word because it means you can't say it, but here she's saying it. So it's like that fun of playing with words, and they have their opposite meanings. Everything contains its opposite. That's not true, but a lot of things do. So she's going to make the ineffable a little bit more effable, I guess, a little bit more understanding, in which she details her transformation from a diehard a die-hard materialist. Boy, did she die hard as a materialist, and you can see it from the book. I mean, you don't get too many books that start off saying, "I didn't want to write this one." Yeah, you don't get that. Is it what? And so my reaction is, so don't do it. But she had to.
Yeah.
She had to write this book, and became an open-minded spiritual seeker in the brave new world of psychedelic science. So the brave new world, where have I heard that before? The brave new world of psychedelic science. Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence, Mona Sobhani.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Ah, you're welcome. You're welcome. This the reluctant scientist. I'm going to ask you a coincidence story, but I think it's really good for our audience to know how much you didn't want to write this book. And the reason you didn't write it, I'm going to say, but I want to hear what you're going to say, is so, and like so many people, you did not want to change your view of reality. I
Yeah.
want it
Yes.
to stay this way.
Yes.
And what the
That's
two of us are
exactly.
doing among an army of people is saying, people like the old Mona need to go to the new Mona.
Yeah. Yeah, let it go. Calm down. That's how I think of it now.
Let it go, calm down. Oh, it was
Uh,
painful. It was painful.
it was so hard. It was hard. Yeah. Some it was really difficult. I mean, it's you don't realize how it's it's just interesting. You don't realize how much your beliefs are part of your body and your being and your ego and all of those things. You don't realize how much how like it kind of is incorporated in everything that you think about or the way you behave, and you don't really realize that until you start to change them. Um and in myself, I felt the resistance, right? Like, and I was trying to be a scientist and follow, you know, evidence, or like read or stay open-minded. But that's when I started feeling like, and I noticed it in my body, like physically, tense, I would get tensed up, I would get emotionally riled up, my stomach would clench, and I would get like angry. It took me a really long time to notice this, by the way, but as I was trying to open my mind, read spiritual texts, and other kinds of texts I wouldn't normally read, I just started noticing that. I started noticing my reactions to it and all of the emotions that would come up. And then at some point, I just started, kind of stepping back and being like, what is this? What is going on here? Why am I reacting so strongly? And the interesting thing,
Acting so strongly to what?
to the idea that I could change my beliefs and not be a, I don't know, condescending, arrogant scientist anymore. That I, believed could scoff at things that I thought were nonsense, like intuitives or psychics or anything paranormal, really. And I realized over time that I enjoyed that superiority, like for whatever reason. So
Yeah,
I started,
you had to give up an identity as
yeah,
as an arrogant arrogant neuroscientist who knew what was right.
I
So
knew what was right.
this was a major shift in how you had to think about yourself,
Yes.
to go from neuroscientists in the lab, everything's controlled, we know what we're doing here, we come up with results, they got to be right, to what?
And yeah, that's where I think part of the anxiety and emotions were coming up, because for a while I didn't know. I was like, where, I think I was looking for a class of people to fit into. I was like, if I'm not in this group, then what group am I in? And didn't really find that for initially, when I was I was like, well, I'm not a new ager. I mean, I was like, I'm not gonna walk around now. I don't think like this anymore, but this is how I used to think. Like, well, I'm not, there's no way that I'm gonna be one of those people.
And what are those people? Who are those people that you didn't want to become?
Yeah, people who believed or on faith or had trust in things that we couldn't see and measure. Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't have that because my entire work and identity and everything was tied up on that. It's like, and I just thought, no, you can't be that. And as I say in the book, to be fair, our society is moving towards that direction of very like evidence-based, science-backed, data-driven. That language is all around us, and it takes almost like bravery to be like, well, I know there's no concrete evidence, but I believe. Like, it's kind of a difficult thing. I mean, not for me anymore now, but at the time it was unthinkable to me to come out and say that or be like that. So
You just didn't know that there was a lot of other people thinking like that, who were reasonably
yes,
intelligent people
yes,
able to think about an alternative to what you were talking
exactly.
about. So part of it is that you were cloistered in a kind of nunnery of neuroscience at USC.
Right. Yeah. We're stuck in our groups. And yeah, later I branched out and found there were so many scientists, physicists, neuroscientists, psychiatrists, philosophers, historians, like a lot of people from other fields that were very smart, very well trained, serious careers. And not that you need that, but that, old me was like, oh, okay, like I could identify with them in some way. And they were thinking about these issues, just very rationally, like open-mindedly. And once I realized, I don't think I came across that until towards the end of like when I was writing the book. But once I did, I thought, oh, okay. It was like a sigh of relief, like, oh, okay. There's a group, there's others like me, I think is what
Yeah,
I'm not alone. Yeah.
you're not alone.
Mhm.
And your journey, for most part, in your book, which I hope can be seen by our audience, is about her journey. And it was a lonely journey, except for one funny little thing right at the beginning that made me wonder. Mona Sobhani's mother
Mhm.
read coffee grounds to predict the future. And she
Yeah.
was right a lot. So here she had in her family with her mother
Yeah.
doing this coffee ground thing, predicting the future, and Mona's off being neuroscientist. I don't know anybody who thinks like this weird stuff. There's nobody, I'm all by myself. There's no,
Right.
except for, what about mom?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we have this in our family. It's in our culture.
What's your culture?
I'm Persian. So I think in our culture and many other cultures in that region, I, and probably all over the world, well, we have a tradition of divination. You can use different things. I think my mom read tarot at some point too, but my grandmother used to use this kind of thicker coffee that you leave in the cup and it creates shapes, and then you have an intuitive reader look at it. So my grandmother used to do that, and then my mom learned from her mother and has always been doing this at our family parties in the background, and I never, because it's, when you grow up with it, you don't really pay attention to it. It was just kind of there. And then when I started grad school, I started going home on the weekends to visit my parents, and she started reading for me. And I at first didn't really, it was a bonding thing. But then I noticed that the things that she would say would come true. And so I started taking notes for 10 plus years, just jotting everything she said down and like, does it come true? Does it not? What are I got curious, like, what are the factors that influence whether she's right or wrong? But it was very casual and not like something I did very seriously, but I noticed she was more right than she was wrong. So I couldn't explain it with science. I mean, we had no framework to explain that kind of thing with traditional science. So I just lived in cognitive dissonance, just whatever. It's just
That
like
you,
there's that.
I
And
like that. You lived in cognitive dissonance because that's what you had.
yeah.
There is what there's an old saying that what you're looking for is right there at home, and it was right there at home the whole time because you've
Yeah.
come back to the whole Persian tradition
Mhm.
of being able to predict the future and wonder about how that happens and how time works and how can you do that with coffee grounds and patterns
Yeah.
and tarot cards, which I'm interested in. It was right there, but you had to go all the way around to see that your culture and particularly your mother was representing something that was really very important to you. And that's important for other people to know that is that sometimes you can travel around the world looking for something, and that something is right under the doorstep of your house. And that's
Yeah,
what that's what happened with you. Well,
absolutely.
I that's it's such it was such an agonizing trip for you, Mona. Um, Agonizing. It came through
Mm.
because you so dearly wanted to hold on to "I'm a scientist" thing, and you wanted to belong too. I think
Mhm.
that's an important part of it too. Is want to be part of something. So now you're part of something else,
Yeah.
and that's congratulations on being able to make that transition and describe it for the rest of us. And when people make major transitions in life, coincidences are likely to be happening.
Mm.
If you pay attention to them, they sometimes help you with making the transitions that you're involved with, and that's part of what I'm trying to be able to say. It's become mainstream enough,
Mhm.
at least so far, that there was an article in the Wall Street Journal um, on October 12th about the power of coincidence. Uh,
Mhm.
and it quoted a couple of neuroscientists from Johns Hopkins, psychedelic guy Yobani, I think's his name, if
Mhm.
I'm saying it right, begins with a Y, and then a person at Columbia who's interested in spirituality, and they also happen to quote me. Uh, and that
Excellent.
was the basis of that was explaining how meaningful coincidences are useful to people
Mm.
in the Wall Street Journal.
I love
October.
that. I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't see
This
that.
happened yesterday, October 12th. This won't be published right away, but October 12th, 2022, there was another foray from weirdness into mainstream culture.
Mhm.
So it's part of what's happening. And there's a beautiful story in there. You might be able to see it
Oh, yeah, yeah.
that
I can't wait to look it up.
she did. So you're part of a movement, and you know that because we have to be doing something different from what you were trained to do, and you know
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
why don't you tell us? I almost like bedtime stories. Mona, would you please tell us a coincidence story?
Yeah. I'm going to tell, since we're talking about that time of that transition, I'll tell the coincidence, the series of coincidences that kind of pushed me in this direction. So I was in a having an existential crisis or whatnot. I wasn't having a good time in life. I won't tell all the details, but I was in kind of crisis. And my friends and I started going to psychics and intuitives for it was because so my mom had been doing readings. She had predicted two big emotional events in my life, like two kind of big things. And I became more curious about these like readings and the nature of the universe. And for the first time ever, I was thinking about fate and destiny and whatnot. And didn't really I didn't try to read or research about it, but it just so happened one of my friends was like, "Oh, she had gone through something similar." So she was like, "I know this really good intuitive in LA. She'll turn you away if she can't read your energy. So she's trustworthy. And I've been to her. She's really good. We should go to her." And then there's a few others I know. And then I just got curious, like, like, okay, let's I've never been to a psychic. I was very skeptical, but because it's different than my mom, right? My mom's not trying to impress me. So, but for a psychic, if you're going, you're paying them and there's this, stigma around them as being frauds and whatnot. So I was like, all right, well, we'll just see. So we went, and my friends kind of made this like a little pseudo like experiment for ourselves, and we would go to the same lady at the same time and then over time and switch readings and see if they were specific to each of us, or if they were giving vague things, which is the general conception of them. But we found they were very specific. And then in that they would mention things to me about karma and bad. They'll be like, this was a past life thing, this is a karmic event, this person is in your soul group. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know what any of that meant. I was vaguely familiar with karma, just the way it's talked about in popular culture. I didn't know anything about reincarnation, never thought about those things. So I just ignored what they said. And I mean, I wrote it down, we recorded the sessions, but it didn't affect me really. I was like, that's weird, I don't believe in that. Okay, whatever, she believes in that, that's fine. And I wrote it down and then didn't think about it. And then months later, and I wasn't reading anything about spirituality. I wasn't spiritual yet. This was like the extent of my was just going to these readings. And then I was listening to, I read Chelsea Handler's book, Life Will Be the Death of Me. And she had this limited series podcast with just a few episodes, mostly about therapy and how her therapist, Dan Siegel, had helped her so much, and the Enneagram and whatever. But then one episode, she had Laura Lynn Jackson on, who's a psychic medium. And Chelsea, in her book, she's always been a skeptic. She calls everything woo-woo. She like hates all that stuff, which is probably why she resonated with me at the time on that. But she had Laura Lynn Jackson on her podcast. And then Laura Lynn Jackson starts describing this framework of, we come to Earth to learn lessons, and there's soul groups. And she starts saying all the things that the intuitives had said to me. And I just kind of perked up like, oh, I've heard this before. And oh my goodness, let me write this down. Maybe now I can go back and look at my notes and see if that makes more sense. So she starts talking about that. And so I'm listening, intently. Then she mentions that she had her brain studied. And of course that got my attention because I'm a neuroscientist. So she's like, she had her brain studied at this, the Windbridge Research Center. And she's like, I always want to help science figure out, why I am the way I am. And then her and Chelsea Handler actually tell a coincidence story themselves. So they mention, they're like, everyone should read this book. It's called Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. And they didn't say what it was about, but Chelsea tells a story of how she was at dinner with a friend, I think in New York, and they get in a fight over dinner because the friend is like, you have to read this book, it's so super interesting. And she gets in a fight with the person, being like, this is garbage, like I don't believe in this, stop telling me to read it, this is stupid. And then she leaves the dinner, gets on a plane to come to LA, and the book Many Lives, Many Masters is in the
Many
pocket
lives, many lives, and many masters. I just want to make sure people hear that phrase, because you're saying it
that quickly.
Yeah, too quick, a little quickly. Many Lives and Many Masters is a seed book in ideas about reincarnation.
Yeah. So she gets on the plane, and that book is in the pocket, the back pocket of the seat in front of her. And right after she left that dinner, getting in a fight with a friend. And so she ends up reading it on the flight home. And then by the time she lands, she's like, everyone has to read this book. So I ordered it. And
well, that's to talk about coincidences here. She shouldn't do it. It's a bad thing to do. And there it shows up, because she's really doesn't think it's a good idea. But there it is. So that kind of presentation of what you need, how many people leave books like that right in the right there, right in front of her? She's got to like pick it up. It's a little like these stories of people, a little like people in libraries having books fall on them, and that book fell on her by being in the front seat like that. So and that's Chelsea Handler we're talking about, or is that's who's in the that's who found the book. And Chelsea Handler was somebody who'd written a book that you had seen, I think.
Yes, that I had read.
That you had read. Okay, I just want to be able to like get a little clearer. Okay, so Chelsea, the skeptic, kind of like you, sees this book which she'd heard and didn't want, and then she reads it, and then then what happened?
Yeah. Okay, so then I ordered the book, I read it, and then for people who aren't familiar with it, it's this psychiatrist who's really well, Yale, Columbia, and then he stumbles across past life regression in his therapy session with a patient and doesn't know what's going on, but follows the lead and ends up doing this for his career because he finds it's very healing for the patients. But in the story,
And
he
then
start.
what are you going to say?
Yeah.
What past life regression is?
Okay, sure. Yes. So it's so for him, I guess they use hypnotic regression sometimes. I don't know how frequently it's used, you would know better, to get access to memories that might have been suppressed from like early childhood or traumatic, or yeah, from early childhood that may have been traumatic. So that's what he was doing. That he had been working with this patient for a year and a half, and she had all these anxieties, like was afraid of the dark, just massive anxiety, couldn't sleep, afraid of drowning. And a year and a half traditional psychotherapy, nothing worked. So he was like, last resort, he's like, all right, we'll just try a normal, hypnotic regression, and asked her to go back to the time of her trauma. And then she does recall one from when she was 2 years old, and he expected, she had some emotional catharsis, expected her to get better, but she came back the next week and still was not better. So he's like, all right, we'll just keep trying this. So he did another regression with her, said, go back to the time of your trauma. And she spontaneously starts describing like a seemingly past life, like I think she was a blonde in real life, and she's like, I have black hair, I have sandals on my feet, it's 2 BC. I'm making up the numbers, I don't remember. And then she describes how she died in a flood in that life, and she like relives the death, has a catharsis, about the whole thing, wakes up, and then that fear of drowning is gone. And so he's like, oh my God, nothing's worked, I'll just continue doing this with her. So session by session, he does regressions, and she keeps recalling these past lives, like one where she was isolated in a cave, I think, because she had a disease or something. I may not be remembering all the details correctly, but
That's all right.
yeah,
But she go the drowning and the flooding is a good place for us to like suggest that there was more for her to do. But
yeah.
he stumbled on it with this
Mhm.
woman. He was just doing I'm just doing some hypnosis, and pop, she's talking about somebody else who's also her, and
Right.
that's the kind of happy accident we call serendipity. And he got
Mhm.
the right person to do he got the right person to be able to do that with, who was able to
Right.
be fluid enough under the hypnosis to be
Mhm.
able to go back. And that science proceeds like that with serendipity, like happy accidents like that one. So okay, I
Yeah.
just wanted to get everybody to get who didn't know something about
Right.
what that was about. So
Yeah.
okay, so Chelsea reads the book and then goes home and what?
Oh, and so I was reading the book,
So you read the book.
and um and then so he does the regressions with her. She starts one by one resolving these anxieties and phobias and fears, and then in one of the sessions he describes where the atmosphere changes, and she starts talking in a different way while she's under regression, and then allegedly these master spirits or something come through her and start giving him information. They try to validate to him that they're real by telling him things about the way that his son and his father died that nobody could have known. And his son had just died, like it was a baby, the newborn baby died just a few weeks before. And so they give him information, and then they describe to him the spiritual framework. So then for me, I was like, oh my God, this is like crazy. So it was, for me, it was the third time this idea of Earth is a school you come to learn lessons about charity, love, kindness. So he describes that, and I'm like, okay, like what is this spiritual framework that I've never heard of that like keeps popping up? And so then that was when I finished reading the book, I was like, all right, I'm gonna possibly start reading other things about this, but I wasn't sure. And then here's my big one. So I wasn't sure, and I was like, maybe I was hanging on to my identity. I was like, do I want to read more? This book already weirded me out. I was already like, what am I reading? Master spirits, And I asked, I've always been a meditator, not always, but for years I've been a meditator. And so in meditation one morning, I was like, I need some, I was guidance. And I thought, let me just ask the universe for a sign. And I had been trying to ask for signs, but I kept forgetting what sign I would choose because I kind of wasn't that dedicated. So then I gave up and I was like, I really need a sign to know if I should continue reading, about this spirituality stuff. Like I'm considering going to get more books, by Weiss or whatever. Like, should I do it? And I was like, I need a sign so big that I won't miss it because, and it has to be obvious and related to all this and whatever. And so I made a very clear request. And then 2 days later, I was going to dinner with my friends for a friend's birthday. And I was driving over in an Uber to Santa Monica. And my friends called me and they're like, how far are you from the restaurant? When are you getting here? I'm like, oh, I'm like, a few minutes away. I'll be there shortly. Why? And they're like, you're never going to believe who's here. Chelsea Handler. Chelsea Handler is here. They're like, you have to get here immediately. And like they hung up and the whole dinner I was like somewhere else because I just had goosebumps the whole time as I was like, I just can't believe this. Like I just can't believe I asked for a sign and it's Chelsea Handler. It was her podcast and it was the book. And I was like, does this mean I have to start reading about spirituality? And like I was so my mind was just elsewhere during the whole dinner because it felt like, it was one of those like goosebumps from head to toe. Like it just felt very like it was for me. And I know people say we're in LA, but we don't, we see celebrities here and there, but I've never seen her before that night. Still haven't seen her since, but hopefully I will one day.
That's the kind of story that therapists sometimes deal with in helping somebody break through their shell of rationality. And you were ready to break through because you were looking around and there it happened. Now, I hope not maybe now that maybe you'll get interested in a concept of human GPS, which I describe in my book, or inner GPS, which a friend of mine calls it, which might even be a better name, that you, in ways that we won't try to describe, were able to get yourself where you needed to be without knowing how that happened. So there's a lot of arranging to be able to take place for two people to cross like that. And it seems magical, which it is, but I'm suggesting that the human GPS allows us to pinpoint somebody and then find a way to get to that person at the right time. And I think it is a calculable idea. I think it's. I think the brain, with the help of other sources, can help make us make these calculations. But that's for maybe you and I to discuss in another time.
Yeah.
But that's one of my favorite ideas, and you just illustrate that. You asked for a sign. It was as if it happened. Somehow it happened to you. I'm saying you participated.
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea. I've always been very observant of coincidences. I was very interested in them when I was in college. I used to write them down, and I do feel, I think I'm intuitive, and like sometimes I feel these like very strong hunches to like go to this place or email this person or call this person now. And I've always listened to those, but now even more so, of course, after all of this, now I really listen and try to pay attention. And I take coincidences to mean you're on the right track or to pay attention to something. And I may not always know what it means immediately, but I'll just kind of like file it away for later.
Yeah. That's why I encourage people to write down their coincidences, because sometimes you can't figure out what they mean to you at that particular time.
Right.
And that's what you've done. So we've talked here about breaking through Mona's rational cell and need to be part of something, so that she could not be as alone as she was. And that's what we have just talked about, the transition from reading Coffee Grounds and Chelsea Handler. What you were getting to doing to now who you are now. And take a look at this book, because one of the nice things about this is it summarizes the data on the weird stuff that people experience regularly, like psi phenomenon, for example. And we're not going to talk about how psi is spiritual in this, because that's a kind of question that gets me a little twisted around. But this is such a useful guide for those who want to go from I'm not sure to like, hey, look, there's a lot of data. If you believe in data, Mona has collected it and written it in a very clear, comprehensible way so that you can, in a shortcut, experience what she took many years and a lot of pain to be able to do.
Yeah, that's right. That's and that is the mindset I had when I was writing the book. It was because I found so many books with the evidence, but I think as we've been talking about, I felt, as a person, like going through this difficult transition, like I wanted someone else's experience. And I'm sure those exist, but whatever, they didn't come across my path at that time. So, but when I was writing the book, I thought, I'm going to write this book to the old me. And what would she need? She would need all the data, concise, and a personal story, to validate that, yes, it's hard, possibly, probably, to overthrow a belief system, and to change your worldview. But that if you want to do it, here's some here's some evidence, and that it's possible. And I mean, for me at least, I'm so much happier. Like, it's really interesting thinking back to, again, noticing all the ways I feel like my body was telling me I wasn't very comfortable with this person that I was projecting out to be, because it's not really who I am. And so yeah, I mean, so yes, it was a very difficult transformation, but in the end, it's a lot better on the other side.
Yeah, and here you are helping other people make the same kinds of transition. Well, let's skip a little bit further along in your
Sure.
book and what you're writing about to get to consciousness.
Oh dear.
Consciousness. Well, there's a lot of ambiguity about what we mean by consciousness. And one of the basic definitions is I'm breathing and I know it. It's kind of like a place to start, but we go beyond that. And you describe, among other things, changes in frequency, the harmonics of frequency with certain things like psychedelics and meditation. And this idea of energy patterns coming out from the human brain and body. Would you talk about that? And I want to see where we might go with that.
Yeah, sure. So that's something that I, of course, initially I was very stuck on the, okay, if some people are intuitive and they can get information from, I don't know, somewhere else, I was stuck on the mechanism of that. How is that happening in the brain or in the body? And so that's why I went to look at all the literature. But it was, traditional neuroscience doesn't look at this kind of stuff, so you have to kind of piece it together. But there was some recent research looking at, so I stumbled on the idea of altered states of consciousness, or there's all these different states. There's we're awake, there's the state when you're kind of falling asleep, there's being asleep, there's psychedelic state, meditative state, all these different states. And your brain has it switches frequencies depending on what state you're in. And so
you're talking about alpha, beta, theta frequencies?
Yes. Yeah. And I did more imaging work, so I'm not an EEG expert, but that's the extent of what I know. Yeah. So
what did you mean by frequencies from the way you were doing research?
Well, I was referring to that research, but do you mean the harmonics? There's this newer modality that just came out in the last few years that when I was doing imaging work, I wasn't available or people weren't using it. There's a research group looking at harmonics, and the math is complicated, but they they try to pull out the harmonic state of the brain, which if you ask me what that is, I don't know, as a metric. So instead of just blood flow, which is what we look at with imaging, we look at where the blood goes, and then we assume that that part of the brain is active, like it's burning energy, so it needs blood. So that's what we do in imaging. So with theirs, they're looking at it, not just the simple contrast, but they're looking at the harmonics. And they looked at
What
it
is
with
harmonic? What does harmonics mean?
that is a more, I don't have a good definition for it, but I think it's, I think what they're trying to do is pull, you know what, I'm not going to try to, I
So
don't know.
don't try
Yeah.
to answer it, because in music, harmonics are perhaps different chords that go together. That they are maybe 8 steps away from each other, and they still can harmonize with each other because they're the same at a different level. That's a simple
Right, a more harmonized state. That's a good way to put it. Yes, no, that I like the way you said. I just didn't want to say it wrong because I'm not
Well,
that.
because I
Yeah.
think that's because the harmonics idea is really important in a interpersonal sense, and that's what I'm trying to be able to get to, is that I think each of us has an energy like fingerprint. It's like it's what we walk around in, uh, exuding energy in various harmonics, but off of a basic pattern. And these harmonics are related the way chords on going up on a piano might be the same chord, but further up or further down on the piano. So it's there's a kind of signature of each of us electromagnetically, I'm going to suggest. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I love that. I think you're right. And that's excellent because there have been, so not using this particular metric, not harmonics, but they have done studies with 2 people, and recording the frequencies of their brain using EEG. And they do find that 2 people like working on a task together, their brains do tend to harmonize together, right? You see similar frequencies emerge. So I completely agree with you. I think I asked that question because I remember thinking, again, I was trying to figure out the mechanics of how I was trying to think about the mechanics of past life regression, and I was like, well, how would you get those memories, and like how would you get your memories and not someone else's memory? And yeah, it's maybe because we all have a specific frequency or something, a harmonic, whatever
Well, that's
signature. Yeah.
I like watching you try to answer that question. How does that work? Because I do that too. I mean, I like to say, how does that work? And the past life regression one, I got to go like that. But I started to see how you were thinking about it. What I'm referring to here is also interpersonal harmonics. That if I have an energy signature and you have an energy signature, and sometimes as we're trying to be able to relate to each other, we try to find where our frequency, our energy signature can interact with your energy signature. And
Right.
I think those are measurable.
Right. Yeah. And so this new metric that came out, they were looking at different states of consciousness. So whether you're under anesthetics, if you're anesthetized, meditative, on psychedelics, and they found that there's increasing harmonics, I think, for like going up. I think psychedelics was the highest, at least of what they've looked at. And they're comparing different psychedelics to each other, but I haven't looked at that too deeply. But that was interesting. I mean, we didn't have this when I was doing imaging, so it's like new work that's coming out that's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's really cool. In your book, you talk about blue, think in terms of blue and energy fields, and you talk about being maybe on a psychedelic or meditation, and we talk about a lock and key. Could you describe that a little more for us?
Yeah, so I was trying to find mechanisms for for all of this, and I found a paper that was published in a peer-reviewed journal, Frontiers of Psychology, I think, and it was this. Also, I should mention. So I spoke to the US government used to have a research program into psychic phenomena, and it was run by 3 physicists. So I read their papers, their books, and I spoke to them. And one of them had put forth a theory about the 0-point field, which again, I'm not a physicist, so I don't I don't know. But he had the whole theory. Yeah.
It's a thing, that 0-point field. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he had a theory about how our consciousness can connect to that. But anyway, when I went to search for it in like normal journals, but I found this very recent paper by a neuroscientist in Frontiers of Psychology that described this possible model using a cosmology of cosmopsychism. I think he put that in the paper. If not, he definitely wrote about that in other papers. But his whole theory is he tries to make a mechanism for it. And he's like, okay, let's say we're and there's like a sea of consciousness and it's on some sort of plane. He actually, for the paper, I think because it was a major journal, he places that field as an electromagnetic field. But there's other theories that say it could be something else, the quantum or whatever. So he uses electromagnetic field, and he looks at the neuroscience literature to pull all the different frequency states that the brain is in when it's remembering, or the different states of consciousness. And he focused on the consciousness literature and memory literature, and tries to pose this theory of like, okay, what if on this plane, what if the possible varieties of consciousness, so all the different states that we can experience, are held on that field. And what if our brain is like a recorder that can tap into the field and download, so just like the cloud concept, which luckily is very popular and everyone knows what that is now. It's like the cloud. So it's like the experiences are up there, but we're able to tap into them by aligning with the field with different frequency states. So if I'm going into a meditative state, I put myself in a certain frequency, and it, like you mentioned, it's like the key to the lock, which is in the field, and it opens, and I'm able to download the experience. And so he has this whole model for it in that way.
That's so much what I describe as the psychosphere, our mental atmosphere.
Right.
And you don't have to be in different states. You have, except for the state of like imagining and wanting, and you hit a certain resonance and
Right.
in you, and you find that resonance in the psychosphere or in this field, whatever it might be. It's probably not electromagnetic just. I think there's a lot of other stuff floating around in there, and other ways that things communicate.
I agree.
But
Yeah.
I'm just a guy down here trying to say, I think there's something just all around us that's kind of influencing us, and we can influence it, and we're interacting with it. And it's just kind of a thing that's there. And we can do it by changing the way our minds are organized for a moment. So we get organized around an idea or a feeling. It takes feeling here. By the way, it's not just ideas, neuroscientists. There's
Right.
emotion that's involved here.
I believe that he didn't have that in his model, but I agree.
He's a guy, and he's also a scientist, and scientists don't pay much attention to emotion, and emotion is the driver of all this stuff. And I mean, I think you know this, but I want to be able to, and I'll ask you about it. But we got this thing, what is it called? Something called a heart, I think, that that generates more electromagnetic
Right.
activity than
Than your
this
brain.
thing does, but this distracts us. So we have to form this kind of connection between heart and mind, or heart and brain, because
Yeah.
this has got a mind of its own too
Oh,
sometimes.
yeah.
The
No,
heart
I agree. We definitely, neuroscience as a field we're
doesn't
so focused on the brain. Yeah.
so focus on mind, on rationality. I mean,
Mhm.
let's admit that you and I have done that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And you're trying to be able to get your body
Yeah.
into it, which
Yeah.
includes your heart, and getting that interaction, body, heart, mind. These are ancient wisdom things that we're now trying to be
Yes.
able to
Yeah.
put together in some integrated way. But the
Mhm.
idea is to get this whole thing working so that we can connect with similar vibrations in
Right.
psychosphere, this field this guy was describing, and that can help Chelsea Handler show up at a restaurant for you, for example.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So how do we do it?
Well, I got the worst review on my on my Amazon by someone who wants to know who I didn't tell how to do it well enough.
Oh no.
I mean, this person was a seeker. I appreciated so much what she was
Mhm.
trying to do, but she wanted to know, how do you recognize a coincidence? How do you recognize one that's meaningful because they're happening all the time? How do you pick
Mm,
out from all this which ones you should pay attention to? And
mm,
I kind of knew that as a problem, but I didn't try to address that. And so that it's getting to the kind of very basic questions. How do you do it? Is how do you recognize that this is one you should pay attention to? And it's not just intuitive. It's not a lot of us
right.
can go by, oh, it's a low probability thing and it has something to do with what's happening with me now, and it's saying something to me about what's going on. But some people aren't able to have a button that pushes their this is a coincidence to pay attention to thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I try to listen to, like I said, I try to listen to my my physical reactions to them. And because I mean, some of them are much stronger than others and move you. Like, and I feel like if something moves you emotionally, like my Chelsea Handler one was like knocks me off.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Something like that. I feel like those for me are the ones to pay more attention to.
We're going to just leave the question because hers was so
Okay.
fundamental. It's a kind of a good scientific question, actually, that she was
True, yeah.
asking.
I mean, who
And
knows?
and and I don't think we're going to answer that right now. But one of the questions that you were suggesting we discuss about is the relationship between coincidences and consciousness. I'd like to hear how you answer that.
Um, did I have a specific question? I don't even remember this.
Well, you wrote it down, and I said, "Well, that's a tough one," and we can
I regret writing it
and
down.
we can skip it, and and we can skip that one,
Consciousness. Yeah.
and we've already talked about how you use coincidences. That's one of the other questions you suggested I might be able to do, but what do you want to talk about a little bit more about how to use them?
Yeah. It's funny because like I don't really this is one thing I don't rationalize and I just kind of do it. I think because I've been so um cognizant of coincidences my whole life. Maybe if I was just starting, maybe I would be more confused about it. But I feel like um yeah, for me it's really the way it moves me or elicits a reaction. But like you said, I used to write them down a lot. But now I have so many that I can't write. I would spend the whole day writing them down. Oh, this I remember when we were emailing, I mentioned this. I have so many coincidences between my dreams and reality. And like usually it'll be beforehand. I mean, obviously sometimes it's after, but um I'll have a lot of dreams about little things. Sometimes they're insignificant, sometimes they're big, big like a whole event that happens exactly as I saw it the night before. It'll happen the next day. But sometimes they're little things. So much so that I keep a dream journal and write them down and will those I'll make note of during the like, oh yeah, I dreamt of this. And like those are big emotional moments. Like sometimes and I'll just be like, it's like a whole, it's almost like everything's spinning for a second. I'm like, oh my gosh, why does this sound feel familiar? And then like the whole dream flashback will come and then I'll read my notes to remember if it was like last night or the night before. But that happens a lot to me.
This is not a bad way of explaining some deja vu experiences that you dreamed them the night before. That's
Oh,
I get confused by deja vu because
mhm.
sometimes It's something that you just saw out of the side of your eyes and didn't register it consciously, and then you
Right.
see it, and then you think you thought it before,
That's
but that
right.
you dreamt about it and didn't remember the dream, but it feels familiar, is another. Thank you for that. It's really
Yeah.
another good clue to what deja vu might be.
I'm interested in, like, I don't know what deja vu is, and I
Deja
haven't had,
deja
yeah,
vu is I see something now and it seems like I've been there before.
yeah, and I've been having, I haven't had deja vus for years, and then like lately I've been having a lot, and I was like, I wonder if it's just because of, I've been trying to think about it too, like maybe it's like because I'm having all these new experiences, but then why would they feel familiar? But yeah, maybe it's like, like you've been anticipating the release of the book, thinking about things, and then I don't know, so like things start feeling like you've done this before. It's strange. Yeah, maybe it's the dreams, but I have a lot of that, and the more I open to this stuff or meditate or kind of lean into it, the more it happens, which I think you talk about in your book too.
I can talk about my book, but we can talk about it here too. The more you pay attention to it,
Yeah.
the more you pay attention to it, the more you'll see.
Hmm.
And it's still one of my favorite ideas that believing is seeing. It's if we filter by our beliefs about what we're able to see, and
Yeah,
modern
definitely.
politics and modern even thoughts about science and medicine are all, well, I believe this, so it has to be right. It doesn't have anything to do with data, and that's part of a way that we got to do something about. But that's what you're doing, and that's what I'm doing, is trying to be a little bit more dignified about what we accept as what's true. But it's a major problem right now.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
for, for, for some reason, it looks like an hour has passed, Mona.
Already flew by.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, flew by. It flew by. This was really fun trying to get into some stuff with you. And I like to think there's something about having our books published on the same day by the same company
Hmm.
that brings us together in a way that two other authors are not necessarily going to find, especially since we're both scientists. I'm less of a scientist. I did clinical research, uh, count the patients and see what happened to them and see if you can put them together and find some data and become chairman of psychiatry. I mean, that's what I did.
That's
Uh,
amazing.
it was chest pain and panic disorder. It was like get some numbers, and
Mm,
like 40 papers later, and I'm chair of psychiatry. So it like it had an outcome, but it's nothing. I tried to study some of the neuroscience when
mm,
you had to read it in a book and you couldn't see
mm.
you couldn't see
Yeah,
videos. There was such
right.
a time.
Mm,
1990s it was even then. You had to look at brain pictures in 2 dimensions. It was hard to figure out what limbic system. How does
oh
that
my
like? Where's
gosh.
the?
Yeah,
It's like. So I love studying the brain and seeing
me too.
how much stuff comes out that's irrelevant to anything, and it's just about data. But the idea of circuits covers for me both mind and brain, and there's a lot of other stuff. But the frequency things you were talking about in the beginnings of harmonics are really important things to be able to.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in, I spent like the majority of my life and career interested in the mechanics and the mechanisms of the brain and the circuits and all that. And I still love, oh, I just, I love neuroscience too. Like I'm just like, I love neuroanatomy. Like I'm such a nerd. But as I've gone through this journey, I've just, and I write about in the book, like they don't teach us anything about the mind, about psychology, about like personal healing. And I realized that when I got my PhD and people would be like, oh, you're a neuroscientist, let me ask you a question. And I never got a question about neuroscience. I would get questions about neurology, psychiatry, psychology, anything but neuroscience. And that's when I started to realize, I was like, this is, I mean, I love neuroscience, but in sort of when you think about practicality, like for living as a human, I feel like psychology is like, it's important that we tie these fields together because you know, it's, again, it's not really comforting to someone, I think, and not useful to tell them your amygdala is overfiring. Like you need something else with that, you know, like how are they going to fix that? You need the things you do in the lab. I mean, not the lab, the therapy room, right? I don't know what it's called. But yeah, you need that. And so I'm really interested in your work.
Well, thanks for bringing up the amygdala, because I used to be an amygdalocentric psychiatrist
Oh, how funny.
because it was firing both anxiety and depression.
Mhm.
And in psychotherapy and with medications, you're often able to calm the amygdala down. And you could do it with psychotherapy by activating the medial orbital frontal cortex, which had
Mhm.
power to be able to reduce the amygdala. So I could develop a little bit of a model that I could understand
I
to
love
be
that.
able to see what was going, what we might be trying to do therapeutically. But that's something that I know appeals to you. That's what you want to be able to do. And
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
would you, let's end with one final small question, Mona. What is the relationship between the mind and the brain?
Well, Bernard. I mean, the truth is, I'm actually reading. Have you read Irreducible Mind?
Yeah,
That, like, yeah, yeah. I'm in the middle of it.
it's a
Almost.
huge thing. I
Oh
mean,
God, it's so big. I've been reading it for months. It's like sitting there, but I've been, yeah. So I've been reading that, like,
y- my I could not read that whole. They got 3 books, and I did the last one.
oh,
Um,
you okay?
and I presented I try to present the chapters of the last one. I forget what the name of that one was, but it was a little more accessible at Division.
Consciousness Unbound. Consciousness Unbound. Yeah.
So you've looked through them. Eh,
Yes. Yeah. Well, slowly making
so
my way, yeah, through the
th- They
laboriously.
they
Mhm.
pull a lot of stuff together,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of good data. Ed Kelly has been a driver for trying to make this is the data, but it's so hard to get to for so many people that it doesn't make
Yeah,
the impact.
it's dense.
So it's
Dense read.
nice for a person like you to
Yeah.
translate that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I should do that. It's like taking me forever to read it though. But
There are chapters worth skipping.
I'm starting to skim. There's a little, yeah, too, but you're right. It's a lot of good information. So they did the job of that, and now it's just going through and trying to, like, take the academic words and concepts and, like, make it easier to understand. But yeah, I would love to do that, because I think that the reason I brought it up is because it's related to that. They look at that, like, what is the relationship between mind and brain? And I mean, the truth is we don't know. And you can go to any different field. Like if you go to their books, they, you know, posit some possible ways. If you go to classic conventional neuroscience, they'll be like, the brain is the mind, period. So the truth is we don't, you know, we don't know. But if you're asking what I don't think the brain is the mind, or I think that there's a lot, I think it definitely is involved in it. I think they're highly correlated. Um, of course, obviously, you know, from all the data. I just think there are other classes of data that suggest that we don't have the whole model. And we don't have the whole answer yet. And like you, I think for sure we're more intimately connected with our environments than we can see and then we can feel. But I love that. And I wish that we would use these classes of evidence or stories from psychotherapy or coincidences or whatever to kind of lean into that, because it has a lot of really great implications for us, right? We're all more connected to each other and to our environments than we believe. But yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
Uh, in the chapter on the psychosphere, I indirectly respond to Ed Kelly's and his books idea, because their idea is the brain gets into a certain state, and default mode network is a place to start thinking about that, and then it becomes more accessible to consciousness.
Mm.
What's They don't talk about the individual mind itself. And if you find them talking about the mind of that's associated with this brain, and I'm making it like this because it's cloud goes in, it can expand out, and I'm saying we do have an individual mind that is connected to our brains in some way, that through which we connect with the psychosphere and make the connections we want to be able to do. But there is an intimate connection between our brains and our personal minds, not just going into higher consciousness. What do you think of that?
Oh no, I agree with that. I think that's how I came to think of it in the book too. I was thinking, because it's not nothing and then one. Like there's definitely something that's uniquely you and that you're working with on an everyday basis. So I
Good.
agree.
Good. Again, we come to a little concordance. I don't hear that from neuroscientists that I don't talk to very much, but this we got our own minds too, ladies and gentlemen, as well as being able to connect to a greater mind and each other. So Mona, thanks for getting up early, if it's early for you, in Los Angeles, and talking with me, and being my twin on this journey with trying to.
I thank you so much for having me.
And you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yes. Well, we'll see what this coincidence means. We'll see. Our book coming out on the same day. We'll track it.
We'll track it.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.